Hello everyone, this is the third in the series of Machmir, and today we're on rule number 3. And rule number 3 is, you can be Machmir, but not at the expense of another person. This goes back way to our forefather Avraham. As you know, Avraham fought against the 4 kings. He was successful. Appropriate in war, he is eligible to take from the booty of war. And indeed, comes along Melech Sdom, the king of Sdom, and says to him, listen, let's make a deal. Comes along Avraham and says the words, that I will take nothing to the extent of Michrut v'atzrochnal. I'm not even going to take a string. I'm not even going to take one of the laces of the sneaker. Nothing. However, he says, Biladai, not for me. But rak asher achlu ha'na'arim v'chelek ha'anashim asher achlu iti. My army, my fellow soldiers, give them. Comes along the Chafetz Chaim, the author of the Mishnah Berurah, and says, why did Avraham act this way? Allow his soldiers one standard and he go with another standard? And he gives us this rule in his words, and I quote, for himself he was machmir, that he should not have the pleasure of the booty of war. Ulam, however, the people that went with him, lahem lo ichmir, he didn't put his chumrah upon them. Lelametcha, to teach you for all generations. Shahareshut b'yedei kol echad lachmir la'atzmo velo la'achirim. You want to be machmir? It's on you. It's for you only, not for others. As they used to say in Yiddish, machmir is famir alein. Machmir is for me alone. And this is the standard that you should follow if you want to be machmir. And therefore it is totally inappropriate to come along and tell people when they are invited over to your home, hey, what meat would you like me to buy for you? What chicken, which hechsher? That is totally inappropriate. And allow me to share a story that I heard from my esteemed colleague, Rav Hillel Maisels. He invited my Rebbe and mentor, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, together with his wife, Dr. Tova Lichtenstein, may she live many more years in health and happiness, to lunch on Shabbos. So as, unfortunately, has become appropriate, she calls Dr. Lichtenstein and says, well, what meat would you like us to buy? In other words, which hechsher? And Dr. Lichtenstein, who is a great woman in her own right and a Talmidah Chachama, says, what standard? Are you Shomer Shabbos? She said, yes, that's our standard. Now, I can promise you, my great Rebbe, Rav Lichtenstein, had many chumras. Some of them I know personally. However, he would never think of imposing it upon someone else. And therefore, he's invited to lunch on Shabbos. He will follow the halacha, which means if you're Shomer Shabbos, Eid Echad Ne'eman Be'isurin, one person who is Shomer Shabbos is someone you can trust when it comes to Isurim, to forbidden foods, namely that it's kosher, not forbidden. And that's the standard that he followed. In his own home, many chumras, not at the expense of someone else that invites you over for lunch. And indeed, he wasn't alone. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in a very long tshuva about blended whiskey, he comes along and says that blended whiskey is basically kosher. However, he says, in my own home, I'm machmir on myself. But then he adds a postscript, and he says the following words, that even though I personally do not drink blended whiskey, bechabura, when I'm with other people, he says, Hayiti shoseh mashu levarecha mesubin kanahug. I'm at a wedding, the Baal HaSimcha comes and gives me a lechaim, I will drink with him. In other words, Rav Moshe Feinstein, the great halachic decider, knew halacha allows blended whiskey, and therefore you can drink it. You don't go ahead and sit at a table where everyone's drinking a l'chaim for a Baal HaSimcha who comes along and pours you a drink, and you go ahead and say, no, I'm machmir. In other words, not at the expense of that Baal HaSimcha who comes over to the table with that little cup. You want to be machmir? It's on yourself, not at the expense of another person. And this comes to fore with one final example that I believe is unfortunately something that has become too common in Orthodox communities. Every Eruv that you will ever find will have a controversy about it. There's no such thing as an Eruv that meets all standards. So, some people hold from it, some people don't. It's your personal thing, and it doesn't make a difference. However, if you are married and you have 3 children and 2 of them are in carriages, then your chumrah has now become at the expense of, say, your wife. Or your chumrah has come at the expense of someone else who has to carry your talis bag or whatnot. A chumrah is for you. If you want to be machmir on yourself, fine. However, not at the expense of another person.